On this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, we're talking all about what happened at Media Day. What's JB Bickerstaff think of his team? We talk about what Cade Cunningham had to say and many other players. We're also going to talk about the wing rotation for Detroit. A lot of guys vying for minutes on the wings. Who will get them? All of that and more on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. Let's get it.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another exciting night of NBA basketball.
The Pistons are digging in. They got the depth. They got the big men. They got the better basketball team. No doubt about it.
Pistons need a three, and they have just under 3 seconds to do it. Here's Chauncey Billups. Here it is. He's got it. He's got it. Chauncey Billups hits the three. Overtime. Amazing.
Out of bounds. Detroit basketball.
Pistons fans, welcome back to this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me this week is Aaron Johnson. Aaron, how are you feeling after a Detroit Tigers sweep of the Houston Astros?
Man, the Tigers won again, right? God, it's been just an incredible ride. That game, all the emotions, playoff baseball. There is not much like it. I will say that it is just incredible. The heart racing that I experienced during that game was just insane. But what a moment for the Tigers! Super, super exciting. And you and I, we become enemies. It's just how it's got to be.
Yeah, that's how it's going to have to be for a little while, huh? Game one is in Cleveland on Saturday, so the Guards will not have played for a week. In fact, their last game was against the Houston Astros, who asked to not play the last game of the season because it was too wet. And look where that got them. Their butts kicked and handed to them on a silver platter by the red-hot Detroit Tigers. So an AL Central team's going to the championship series, which is pretty wild.
Who would have thought?
And could have three Central teams in the next round because the Baltimore Orioles have forgotten how to score runs. But this is not a Tigers podcast. This is a Pistons podcast, and it has been a big week in the NBA for the first time since probably free agency. It was Media Day on Monday. You were there, which was very exciting. Had a lot to take away from it. You covered it very thoroughly on X/Twitter. So we're going to get into that. We're going to get into the last positional group preview, and that would be the wings, which would be Tobias Harris, Simone Fontecchio, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, and Tim Hardaway Jr. So we're going to get into that as well. But before we do, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, and that is BetOnline. And BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. And if you think you know your stuff, you can get in on a $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for a chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, you can head on over to the online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today, get in on the action. Bet online, the game starts here. And as usual, our requisite pre-show plugs. Again, if you are not subscribed to us on Substack, please do. Our link to the newsletter will be in the show notes for wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be YouTube, Overcast, like I do, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whichever. The link to that is in the description. Please subscribe. You're going to get written content directly into your inbox like you did this morning, as in the day that we're recording this show. You would have gotten Jasper's wings preview, where he goes over each of the wings on the Pistons roster. That gets right into your inbox first thing. As soon as we hit submit, same thing with our guards preview and with our bigs preview, as well as the podcast every Friday and the weekly drive every Monday morning. So if you have not subscribed to us on Substack, we would really appreciate taking the few seconds to submit your email. We're not going to spam you with ads. We're not going to spam you with, with content every single day. We're going to spam you with quality over quantity, and that's what we're looking to provide here at Palace Pistons. And one of those things that we're going to be covering over the next couple of weeks is Media Day, and then eventually NBA preseason. So, Aaron, I want to talk to you about Media Day. I'm going to open it up to you since you were there. I want you to sort of talk about the biggest headlines that you saw or heard when you were at media day for the Pistons. It was probably the most exciting media day and maybe since Cade was drafted.
Yeah, I would say this was, and this is my first time at media day for the Pistons, so I can't really base it off of previous years, but um, everyone felt very aligned on the direction, on the vibe of the team. Like I think that was a very common sentiment from everyone is that the vibes were really good. And there was just an understanding of like, and to be fair, we've heard this year in and year out, but like the need to establish an identity, the need to establish a culture, the need to amend for last season and fix what happened last year. Like those are very common sentiments from Trajan Langdon on down. And I came away from the media day as a whole. A lot of times it's all just kind of cannon fodder. It's nothing that important.
Best shape of my life.
Yeah, I added 15 pounds of muscle and I'm in the best shape of my life. And I just felt like the Pistons were very aligned on where they're at and where they need to be. And I'm not going to say that's going to translate to a ton of wins, but I feel confident in saying this team is going to start getting on the right track this year based on what was said, how it was said, and what the mood in the air feels like right now.
Yeah, so that seemed to be my sentiment as well in following you and following a few of the other people that were at Media Day, is it seemed like a very aligned message. And that really started at the beginning where Trajan Langdon and then JB Bickerstaff sort of went back to back, talking about expectations for the year, what they're expecting, what fans should be expecting. They talked a lot about foundation and setting the groundwork. I think both JB and Langdon said foundation specifically. So after those two, I think it was who went third? Cade?
Yeah, Cade let it off for the
Third?
players.
Okay. So I guess I'll just open it back up to you. We have four big headlines that you had sort of cultivated from Media Day. And feel free to jump in with anything else that may have come back to your memory. But Ausar Thompson is one of the big question marks for the season, not necessarily because of his play on the court, but his health as well. I think a lot of people forget that blood clots prematurely ended his season last year, what was a quite promising rookie season, all things considered. He is in an NBA/Players Association medical protocol for his blood clot issue. JB and Trajan Langdon had said that they're sort of abiding by that and they'll have an update. Ausar said he feels fine. Don't know if that means fine enough to play or fine in that he's not experiencing any pain or symptoms, but anything else that you gleaned from his press conference that would be pertinent to his health and really his immediate future being able to play?
Well, and not the media or the people in the room. Obviously, they were aware of the situation, have been aware of the situation for a while. But I think a lot of people forgot that Ausar Thompson was kind of dealing with this, like at least in the sense that would have impacted him heading into this year. And so this is a significant loss for Detroit. Depending on how long he's out, I got the sense in the room that they're anticipating some sort of answer, some sort of decision very soon, especially when Ausar spoke. He couldn't give any indication on when it's coming. Like he couldn't tell us when to expect to hear anything, but just kind of how he said it, the reaction that he gave, it felt like things would come down the line soon. I will say it's encouraging that he's been doing stuff. He's been, working out, doing stuff with assistant coach Fred Vincent. He's been in a lot of activities. He hasn't been able to actually practice with the team or do the 5-on-5 stuff with the team. It sounds like he's pretty much good to go. It just feels like he's stuck in this case with the NBA and the NBA Players Association, and they're kind of waiting out that final say from them on if he's able to return yet or not. But it creates an interesting situation around the forward spot for Detroit, at least with how they start the year, assuming he's not back within the next week or so, as preseason's still going on. I was always under the impression that Ausar Thompson was going to be a fixture in the rotation. I know many believe he should be in the starting lineup, but things certainly change now with him not playing, not out there. That might impact where he starts in the rotation uh, when he does come back. So I think that's really interesting. Really interesting. We're going to have to watch as well.
And it's going to be something that we could talk about when we go over the wings, in who fills those minutes, and how the rotation sort of shakes out if he's not in the starting lineup to begin the year. Hypothetically, obviously, health comes first, especially when it's something very serious like blood clots. So, in terms of the emphasis on veterans, because the wing room was full of veterans, that was the big gain year over year. They added Simone Fontecchio at the trading deadline. They drafted Ron Holland, who's not a vet, but it's a new face. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris. And another thing, in addition to building a foundation that was really important on Media Day, was this emphasis on veterans, these floor raisers like a Tobias Harris. And I was reading some articles from some Sixers blogs that were saying that it was not a goodbye, it was a good riddance for Tobias Harris. And, I couldn't help but laugh a little bit. Their expectations for him are very different from what Detroit is expecting out of him. But he is one of those important veterans, and we've already seen that. There was a report or some interview where he was talking to Ron Holland about eating salad. It's like the small stuff like that, a veteran that is around these really young guys and, sort of resets that foundation. So there was an emphasis on vets on that roster. Could you go into a little bit more detail on, what you heard about veterans, their expectations for play time? We've talked about JB liking his veterans a lot, probably going to go to the vets more so than people may want to see, but that's kind of why they brought them in.
I came away from Media Day, if I wasn't sure where the vets stood going in, I certainly know now. They are going to be relied on very, very heavily. It wasn't just Trajan Langdon. It wasn't just JB Bickerstaff that talked about the importance of the veterans. It was Cade Cunningham. It was Jalen Duren. It was Jaden Ivey. Everyone from the top down echoed the same sentiment. This team needed veterans. These veterans are already making a significant impact on the locker room, and they're going to play a significant role on the court for the Detroit Pistons. Tobias Harris is going to be the leader of the team. I got that impression from the way he spoke at Media Day. I got that impression from Langdon, who said that the leaders on this team were Cade Cunningham and Tobias Harris. And I came away feeling much better about the state of the roster compared to last season, because they did have a number of veterans on the roster last year. And yes, they brought in some guys last year, Monte Morris, who, got hurt and wasn't able to play. They had Alec Burks. They had Bojan Bogdanovic. But even now, the sentiment was like, these veterans that we have now are just better from last year. I mean,
Playable.
Marcus Sasser literally said so. He's like, these veterans, they're just better. They're more impactful. It's not even, just about on the court. It's in the locker room. They want to talk to you. They want to help you. They want to be there for you. And I came away really encouraged from that. I think Pistons fans should feel very encouraged by that. I also just think they're better players overall. They're more versatile. Like Tobias Harris is a better player than Bojan Bogdanovic. Malik Beasley is a better player than Alec Burks. And then you add someone like Tim Hardaway Jr., who brings the experience from Dallas, and the shooting that he brings, the microwave scoring that he brings, kind of like an a la Alec Burks. You feel better about it. Paul Reed had a really interesting couple minutes up on the podium talking about how he wants to he's one of the few Pistons that came up and was like, yeah, I want to make the playoffs, and said it in a way where you really believed him. He said, I came from Philly. I've made the playoffs every year I've been in the league. I don't know losing. I'm coming here expecting to make the playoffs. And, I think it's like when you have guys that have that expectation and have that experience, it's going to make you play better, because they're going to find their way on the court if someone like Jalen Duren doesn't play up to standard, or someone like Isaiah Stewart doesn't play up to standard. So Yeah, I think the veterans are set for a huge, huge season, and it you could feel the importance of getting them and the impact that they're already having despite being with the team for a few days. I know one comment I'll quickly wrap up here that stood out was it was I believe Ausar Thompson who said it that Tobias Harris after practice after their workouts with the team he would say, "Hey, AT, come over here and shoot with me." Like, does that mean like a whole lot in the grand scheme of things? No, like you're talking about shooting after practice, but it's like having a veteran that wants to stay in the gym afterwards, even though he's probably not on a playoff team in this season in terms of wins and losses, isn't going to mean all that much, but he's going to keep the rookies in the gym, keep the young guys in the gym, help them, be there for them. Like that stuff matters in a locker room. We so often forget that a lot of these guys in the court, especially in the case of the Pistons, they're 20, 21, 22 years old. They're college aged kids playing professional basketball with expectations from millions of people across the world. So came away really impressed by the veterans from Media Day and think the role for them is significant both on the court and in the locker room.
Yeah, and that's why they were brought in here, was to do that. I don't remember stories of the last couple of media days of Joe Harris coming out and saying those kinds of things, or Alec Burks or Bojan Bogdanovic talking about playoffs or bust or I want to make the playoffs. I don't remember that talk hardly at all. Maybe it's because we weren't covering it as closely as we are now because we didn't have a physical presence there, but I don't remember that sort of sentiment last year. I remember Troy Weaver pushing Bojan Bogdanovic out with a statement saying we will be better next year, and then that never coming to fruition. And by the way, when you talk about these veterans being better, I don't think we've properly sold how ineffective the vets on the Pistons were last year. The Pistons traded Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks to New York only for them to not play at all. Seemingly after that, Bogdanovic had a couple games, got hurt. Burks was very much in and out of the rotation. Joe Harris never signed with another team. They have turned over the veterans on the roster from unplayable to all very playable players who played during the playoffs last year. Miss me with the Tim Hardaway Jr. not playing in the final. Big well, when you get into the playoffs like that, it's all matchups.
These guys are going to play, and that's a really good point about the guys from last year's team that got moved. Not playing with their respective teams. You're talking about, and I think you can include Simone Fontecchio in here. Like I know he's only going into his third year in the league, but he's 28. He's been around overseas. Like he's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. And you're talking about between Tobias Harris, Simone Fontecchio, and Malik Beasley. All three of those guys could be starting for you. And then you have Tim Hardaway Jr. coming off the bench. Like they're all going to play. They are all part of this rotation. And as many as three of them, I think minimum two, will be a part of that starting lineup. So, Bojan Bogdanovic, good player, helped the Pistons. Alec Burks, fine player. But before I got to Detroit, was kind of also in and out of rotations prior to that. So it's like these are all guys that are rotation players. Tim Hardaway Jr. maybe fell out a little bit in the playoffs here and there. Was a rotation player all year in Dallas. Malik Beasley started a lot of games last year. Obviously, Tobias Harris, an every night starter. And Simone Fontecchio was a key contributor for Detroit and played a lot as well for Utah before getting dealt to Detroit. So you're talking about guys that are going to play a lot for this team.
Yep. And as I've talked about as well, JB's going to rely on the vets. He did that in Cleveland. He's going to do it again here. That's just the reality of it. They are going to want to win basketball games. I know that they said, and they being Trajan Langdon said, it's not going to be about wins and losses. It's going to be about wins and lessons or whatever sort of, sentiment he shared along those lines. JB is going to want to win some basketball games, and they have the players who are going to be able to do that. Speaking of veterans, one of the quote unquote vets, and Isaiah Stewart is a vet at this point comparatively to some of the other players on this team. He made a very interesting comment, which is he's looking forward to playing more center this year. We've talked a lot about Isaiah Stewart being a small ball five. And even though he's not as good of a three-point shooter as I think people expect him to be, he's still very passable on relatively decent volume for where he was 2 years ago, for example. What are your thoughts on Isaiah Stewart being excited to be playing center this year.
I just think it shows how much last year was an abomination.
A fever dream from hell, yes.
It was just such a miscalculation. There's nothing that says Isaiah Stewart couldn't go out and play some minutes at the four and, just be a little bit more versatile in that way. But last year, pigeonholing him into only being a four, having to play alongside another big, it was just nonsensical. And he knew it. Obviously, he knew it by the way he talked at Media Day. And it's not just Stewart that says, he's going to play the five. JB Bickerstaff said it too. And it makes just a whole lot of sense, right? You have more forwards, more wings that can give you minutes at the four spot. And Isaiah Stewart is best served as a five. It's really that simple. I don't think you have to, to spend too much time thinking about this. We saw last year that it just didn't work, especially when you're talking about putting him next to a big who doesn't space the floor. It has got to stay down low in the paint on offense. And the Pistons didn't have enough shooters outside of Stewart on the court anyway to really space the floor. So you're really putting him in a tough spot. I think it makes a lot of sense that he's returning to being a predominant center on the roster. And I'm looking at Stewart as, he could have a pretty big year. We forget, and it's crazy to say, Isaiah Stewart's the longest tenured Detroit Piston. Incredibly crazy to say that. But going into year 5, it's usually, that year where you're no longer a youngster anymore. If on this team, he's kind of a veteran in a sense, just because he's been here so long. So very interested to see the Stewart season that's ahead of us. And I really am optimistic about his outlook as this team's backup five.
Yeah, I think it's nice that he has a clear role out of the gate, because it seemed like the last couple of seasons he was in this sort of gray area of they didn't really have any idea of what to do with him necessarily. They didn't know if he could play next to Jalen Duren, which we found out that's not a good pairing. They didn't really know if he could be the standalone four. They didn't really know if they wanted him to be a stretch four. They kind of turned him into that over the last couple seasons. But it's nice that going in, he knows he's going to be playing more center. That's the plan. JB has identified a plan, and that you're probably going to see him flip between those two spots fairly regularly. And having that definition is going to be very helpful. Monty Williams saying he just picked Isaiah Livers to start because he just felt like it. That's not going to happen this year. JB's not going to do some of that stuff. At least I don't think he would. So to have that identified role for somebody like Isaiah Stewart, who is going to be on his third coach as well in 5 years, and Jay Knight's going to be on his third coach in 3 years, to have that sort of definition out of the gate, I think really is going to it's going to be important coming out of the gate to have that role, because they haven't necessarily had that. It's been a very fluid situation.
Agreed. And JB Bickerstaff has said that, they're going to spend a lot of the preseason trying out different lineups, trying out different combinations, doing hockey subs to figure out what lineups are working well together. He's got a lot to learn about this group in the next, 4 exhibition games over the next few weeks. They're going to try a lot of different things. So one thing they don't really need to spend too much trying is playing Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren together. There's so many other things that they need to figure out on this roster. It's a new coach. It's a new system with a bunch of players that were not on the team last year that have to figure out how to mesh with the guys that were on the team last year. There's a lot to do. And when you can start going down the pecking order, start going down the list and saying, well, this guy has this role. I know he's going to succeed in this role. We're putting him in his position to succeed in this role. And that was something else that was said at Media Day, was like, where's the emphasis on finding a way to put guys in position to succeed? And that's what you're doing by putting Isaiah Stewart in that backup 5 spot. So I know there's a lot to do in the preseason for Detroit. It won't have to be trying out this too big lineup with Stewart and Duren and praying that there's enough spacing alongside them that it works.
And ironically, there might be enough spacing now if you're going to start guys like Malik Beasley and Smell Fontecchio or Tobias Harris. It might actually finally have the spacing to make that work, but I think JB's experience trying to wedge Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen together is probably going to weigh on him a little bit as well, knowing that Cavs didn't really have a competent shooting four behind because Dean Wade was constantly injured. I doubt they're going to be going to the double big and trying to sort of shoehorn that into working. And it's not on our list, but since we're talking about bigs, Jalen Duren also talked about getting the ball earlier in the shot clock and maybe trying to do a little bit of passing, perhaps out of the elbow, or showcase his playmaking skills and his dribble skills. Did you have anything on Jalen Duren? Because I know we've talked about him being really the X factor this year and his growth as a defender and his growth as an efficient big, and how far that would help the Pistons go.
Well, that's what JB Bickerstaff was talking about. How do they put the ball in Jalen Duren's hands with his unique passing, with his unique ball handling as a center, and how do they get him to do some more things in the offense, especially earlier in the shot clock? And that's something that I've said all offseason. If you've been listening to the show, since the end of last season, I've talked about, can they do some more with Jalen Duren and the ball? You don't just have to use him as a screener in the pick and roll. He can do other things. Let's try to find some ways to maximize his unique skill set rather than pigeonhole him and make him purely a rim runner. So I think that makes a ton of sense. That's something that I think needs to be, time needs to be spent on in the preseason. It's not something that's going to work right away. There will be some kinks. There will be, some mistakes on Jalen Duren's end, no doubt about it. But they want to figure out Jalen Duren. It was JB Bickerstaff said, we need to figure out what NBA skill he has and perfect that and work on that. And we'll go from there. Like, they know Jalen Duren is far from a finished project and has a lot of ways to go. But I like the idea of using him more as a ball handler, facilitator in a sense, like putting the ball in his hands. He has the passing skills to do some things rather than just purely, can they do something in the short roll? Like, he's just much more capable than just, hey, go set a screen and try to, throw down an alley-oop if the angle's there for Cade to get you the ball. Like, there's more he can do. He's too talented to just be put in that position. And I'm at least encouraged that the Pistons are at least looking into seeing what that possibility looks like.
And I keep making references to the Cavaliers, but it's also something that JB has done with Evan Mobley. He made a very big deal last offseason of the Cavs utilizing Mobley as a hub at the elbow a lot more. That fizzled immediately after Darius Garland got hurt, and they sort of had to put Craig Porter Jr. in to facilitate passing because Donovan Mitchell refused. But it was discussed. So again, he has experience working with bigs in that similar way of getting them the ball more earlier in the shot clock, letting them operate, letting guys like, a Malik Beasley fly, off of a pin down, and Jalen Duren's able to find him. And, it's not a dead end possession like Andre Drummond tended to be, not to slander Andre Drummond, but it's encouraging to see that they want to unlock something new in Jalen Duren, especially if, and this becomes even more paramount, if they aren't going to start a playmaker at the two, if they're going to go with, like, let's say an Ausar Thompson is at the two next to Cade, that's really one playmaker out there, and that's all. Assuming that Tobias and Simone and Jalen Duren are out there, or whoever is going to be out there. If you don't have a secondary playmaker, and, the offense is going to have a very difficult time if Cade's the only one out there who can facilitate. So Jalen Duren developing a skill that can provide that as a secondary creator, that opens the door significantly for the Pistons to be a much more free-flowing offense as opposed to running every possession through Cade like they had to last year.
Yeah, and I don't think Detroit has a set starting lineup yet. I think obviously you have your locks in Cade Cunningham and Tobias Harris and Jalen Duren, but I think outside of that, Bickerstaff is going to spend the preseason trying out some different combinations. I think you'll see Jaden Ivey given a chance. I'm pretty confident that you'll see Malik Beasley given a chance with the starting group. Simone Fontecchio given a chance with the starting group. And I think a lot of that also weighs on the fact that of the situation that Ausar Thompson's in. That kind of forces you to try out some different things until he's good to go. I don't know where Thompson necessarily fits in exactly in the rotation. I don't know if he's viewed as a starter, if he's viewed as a bench piece, but there's two open starting spots right now. And there's a number of guys that have a viable chance at getting it. The preseason will give us a really good look at that.
So there's one more area that I wanted to touch on from Media Day, and that is the backup point guard role, because we've talked about that as maybe the last opening, like kind of weakness that the Pistons have. Marcus Sasser talked about working on point guard skills this offseason, and he wasn't particularly effective at that in summer league. I think he had kind of an underwhelming summer league in that regard. There's been a lot of hubbub about Jaden Ivey being the backup point guard and being a guy like a De'Aaron Fox light who can get downhill really quick, but can also distribute the basketball. And we've seen him develop his playmaking skills over the course of his rookie season. He went from being a guy that was not a very good passer to being an actual facilitator and distributor. But Sasser talked about specifically working on point guard skills, which kind of falls in line with what we've talked about of him being like his one chance to really make a dent on his roster is to be the backup point guard, because there's an opportunity for that to happen. And if he wants to be on this roster long term, I think that's what he's going to have to do. So between Sasser and Ivey, because Ivey's the other player that I think a lot of fans are wondering about what we're going to see out of him if he doesn't start. What is he going to do? I think most want him or expect him to start, but he could be the backup point guard. And I think that would be an acceptable role for him as well. It doesn't mean he's going to get not starter minutes. He's still going to get starter level minutes. It just probably won't be at the beginning of the game. So anything from Sasser or Ivey in that backup point guard role that you were able to glean from Media Day?
They didn't really say. They talked about using Jaden Ivey in a number of different ways, using him with Cade, using him in a unit without Cade where he's leading the ball handling. And I don't know where that leaves Marcus Sasser. He's been someone we've talked about a lot this offseason in his potential role in the rotation. And I don't know if it's there if Jaden Ivey's not in the starting lineup. I don't see a world where they play three point guards. I just there's too many other guys that could get minutes if they have Cade and if they have Ivy playing all of the point guard minutes. There's too many other guys that you could put out on the court alongside them. But Marcus Sasser, and I hate to defer to this, he's going to get his chance in the preseason. Like, he's going to get looks. They're going to see if he can take care of the basketball, if he can run the offense in this JB Bickerstaff system. They'll have that opportunity in the preseason. If they're, starting games with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey, you can pretty much assume Marcus Sasser is going to get a look at some point shortly after one of them comes out. So I don't know if we have a definitive answer one way or the other yet on where either of those guys stand in the rotation. But again, I defer to we will see how the preseason shapes out and where JB Bickerstaff puts these guys over those 4 or 5 games.
Well, this time next week, we're going to be able to talk about some preseason basketball. So maybe we'll have a little bit more information about that when we record next week's podcast. So was there anything else from Media Day that you want to touch on before we move on to our next topic? Enjoyed it? Did you see anybody else there that you wanted to mention?
I think that the other thing that I came away with is the talk about building, the foundation, making sure they do things the right way. You hear it every year. Is this the year that the Pistons actually start to do that? Like, you hear it year in and year out from whoever the exec is, from whoever the coach is. We have to reestablish Detroit basketball. We have to play the brand of Detroit Pistons basketball that everyone wants to see. And every Piston said the same thing this year. Is this the year that they'll actually start to do that? Doesn't mean they have to win 40 games. Doesn't mean they have to be a playoff team. But they're going to start playing basketball the right way. Or they're going to start showing growth. They said they will. Let's see if they will.
I think that's a good stopping point for your first Media Day. First of many, most likely. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the discussion on the wings. And fortunately, Jasper is not here to provide us additional insight, as he's the one that wrote the piece. And again, if you want to read the piece yourself, you can go to palaceofpistons.com and you can subscribe to our Substack and you can find it there. And to make it even easier, you could just subscribe and you'll get it right to your inbox as soon as it gets published. But we did complete our Three series positional preview with the wings discussion. And for the case of wings, we defined a wing as Tobias Harris, Simone Fontecchio, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, and Tim Hardaway Jr. We didn't talk about Ron Holland a whole lot in the media day portion because I figured we'd be talking a lot more about him in this particular section. And the wings rotation to me is the area that the Pistons really emphasized a whole lot. And if you watched the Pistons at all last year, you saw that their wing rotation was pretty much propped up by the mummy legs and body of Bojan Bogdanovic. And if that wasn't working, then I don't know if you can hear the dog in the background. Obviously not happy with Bojan Bogdanovic either, but propped up by him, you've completely flipped that script. Tobias Harris is a significantly better and younger scorer at this stage in his career. Fontecchio came in and made an immediate impact as a stretch four. Ausar Thompson was electric at pretty much every moment. And then Ron Holland has bouncy skills and, a pretty high ceiling. And Tim Hardaway is sort of a floor raiser in addition to Tobias Harris. So what's your feeling on the wing rotation now? This year, it's obviously better than last year, but what sort of immediate impact does this influx of wing talent have on the Pistons?
It feels like the safest, deepest group on the roster because all of those guys can give you minutes. All of those guys, outside of maybe Ron Holland, could start for you. You go back to last year and you think of the guys that were absorbing the wing minutes, when Bojan Bogdanovic was out or after he got traded. You're talking about Kevin Knox. You're talking about Isaiah Livers, guys that, borderline NBA players at best. And now you have experience. You have players that have specific skills. You have versatility. And then you still have that youth in Ausar Thompson and now Ron Holland. I'm really, really encouraged with the wing group. I love the versatility that it has and just the talent. Like this is probably the most talented group, unless you just are that gung-ho on Cade Cunningham and you want to say that he makes the guards better. The array of talent in this group is definitely the best among the three position groups. So they did a lot this offseason, and give Troy Weaver credit for the Simone Fontecchio move last year to really bolster this portion of the roster. Simone Fontecchio and Tobias Harris are two starting level wings. Ausar Thompson is capable of starting and giving you really good minutes. Malik Beasley is in the same category if you consider him a wing. Maybe you consider him a guard. And then Tim Hardaway Jr. fits in at whatever type of role on the wing you want to give him. He can give you 15, 20, 25 minutes a night. And on those nights where he gets really hot, he can be a key factor in winning you a game on that night that he just shoots 7 of 7 from the 3-point line and ends up scoring 27, 28 points. And you end up beating a team that maybe you weren't expecting to beat. So a really solid group here, and it's just a really good mix. I think having the veterans around is going to really help Ausar Thompson and Ron Holland in their development because those guys are very, very far off from being finished products. They have a lot of skills that need to be developed. They have a lot of growing up that needs to happen. And they have some adults with experience now that are really going to be able to help them.
Yeah, I think it's a good blend. The ceiling is very high for Thompson and Holland, and it's why they were both taken 5th overall. Holland wasn't maybe the best player on the G League Ignite, but he pops off the screen when you watch him, whether it's a massive dunk or just, his size overwhelming on defense. Same thing with Ausar. We saw in the Summer League last year, he was electric. We saw during the season, he was a rebounding fiend. So much so that we felt he could play the 4, and to a certain degree, we still think he can play the 4.
Oh, I'm sure he will. I'm sure he will.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised by that. JB sometimes played small and had to when Evan Mobley was out. And then Jared Allen would need a break. So he has experience doing that as well. There was a lot of Isaac Okoro or Max Strus at the 4 that we saw last year that I think may sort of rear its head in a different form here with the Pistons. But it's a good blend of vets. It's a good blend of youthful guys that need sort of that North Star type of guidance. And, you have solid players in Harris, Fontecchio, and Hardaway. And Fontecchio does have quite a bit of experience over in the European leagues playing professionally too. So I don't want the 2-year veterancy status to come away as like he's a super young guy. He does have experience playing professional ball. But Hardaway, finals experience, Tobias Harris, deep playoff run experience, and Fontecchio was very good last year and is obviously very excited to be back in Detroit. But we haven't talked about Ron Holland really. And he's the other guy that I think Pistons fans, in addition to Ivy, if we don't see a lot of Ron Holland this year, people may think that it's like an abject failure. If you're more in tune with the Pistons, you'll know that him playing in the G League is probably very helpful because the Ignite in their final season, it wasn't quite as high profile as it was when they had like Jalen Green there out of the gate or Jonathan Kuminga. But Holland is a little bit more unpolished than those two guys that came from the G League Ignite. So, what are your expectations for Holland? Does Ausar's injury or really just unknown status, does that affect how you feel about Holland maybe to start the season? Did he give any answers during media day that may impact your belief that he could be an impact player a little bit faster than maybe we thought?
Ron was really high character in his talk with the media, which is more expected from the younger guys. I think they come in, and I think it just kind of wears on you over the years when you're talking to the media game after game after game. But he came in really high spirits. One of the things he said that really stood out and kind of caught the attention of the room was like, he said, I wish that he could go out and start playing right now because he wants to show everyone how much better his 3-point shot has gotten since the summer league. But I get the sense that Ron Holland will spend a fair amount of time in the G League this upcoming season. I think the Ausar Thompson health situation could impact that, depending on where Thompson stands in terms of getting back on the court. But if all of the wings are healthy, based on what I believe, I think he's going to spend a fair amount of time with the Motor City Crews, and I think that's okay. I think that's a good thing, getting him game reps. They're not far from the Little Caesars Arena, so if there's a game where the Crews are at home and the Pistons are home the next night, you can send them down to the G League and have them back for your end of the bench the next game in Detroit. So I definitely foresee Holland getting some run in the G League, and I think that's a completely acceptable thing. We also kind of said it on the podcast as well throughout the offseason and then after free agency and after a lot of the roster moves. If the Pistons get to the point in February and March where the season's kind of at a point where they're not really in playoff contention, you'll get to see plenty of Ron Holland then, and you'll probably get a much better look then compared to him in November and December, still getting his feet wet in the NBA waters. So, yes, I do see a lot of G League time for Ron Holland. I don't think it's a bad thing, and I still think he'll have an opportunity with Detroit. We'll see how much the Ausar Thompson health situation impacts that. But also the G League starts about a month later than the NBA does, so Holland will have some time up with the Pistons anyway before the G League season even begins.
That's a good point. The month gap there does sort of give him a little bit of cushion before then, and I think being around those vets is going to be very impactful for him heading into the G League season, where I think you're right, he is going to spend a lot of his time, and we've harped on that quite a bit. The last thing I want to touch on for the wings discussion, and I think it's important, is that the Pistons, a lot of Sixers fans were very like, wow, you're excited about Tobias Harris. And the answer is yes. Yes, we are. The answer is yes. If you saw the wing rotation last year, you would also be excited about a guy like Tobias Harris coming back to Detroit. A guy that obviously likes the organization, likes the city, likes the fans. That's been very clear from the get-go. And he's an immediate floor raiser for this team. Was there anything from Tobias throughout media day that stood out to you as a guy that has sort of, because he was a much younger player when he was with the Pistons the first time around. They got him from, I believe, Orlando, and he was a young guy coming into the league. Now he's a vet, lots of playoff experience, played around Joel Embiid, played around James Harden, played around a lot of high-end skill guys. Now he's coming to a team where he's sort of in the reverse position where he's the vet and teaching these young guys. Was there anything you gleaned from Tobias Harris that should sort of ease any Pistons fans' fears that, oh my gosh, we gave this guy so much money and, Sixers fans are excited to not have him on the roster anymore?
Tobias is very aware of the role he plays for the Pistons now. He knows he's going to play a significant impact for them on the court, but he spent a lot of his time talking about wanting to be a mentor, to be a veteran for these young Pistons, going as far as saying, like, this is how he wants to leave his mark on the game of basketball. He wants to mentor these guys and help them grow. And that's really, really encouraging because, that's not something when Bogdanovich came out really sad or Alec Burks came out really sad. And not every 29, 28, 30, 31-year-old has to come out and say that. Like, not everyone wants to be that guy. A lot of guys just want to play basketball, and that's okay. But for this young of a team, you need guys that be leaders, will help your young guys develop and teach them the ropes. And Tobias was very, very affirmative in saying that that's what he's going to do. And let's face it, he's going to help this team so much on the court. He is their best forward on the roster. Things soured out in Philadelphia. It's a tough city to play in. Let's not act like the Sixers were some phenomenal playoff team and Tobias Harris was the only thing holding them back. The Sixers franchise players spent a lot of time hurt, missing time, and let's not act like the rest of that roster was shooting bullets. They were not. Tobias is not going to be the first or second best player on a championship contending team, but he's very much still going to help the Detroit Pistons. He is going to be a fixture in the lineup. And as Trajan Langdon has already said, he is going to be a leader on this team. He has a very good relationship with Cade Cunningham. He talked to Cade Cunningham before deciding to come and sign with the Detroit Pistons. So there was very much a connection and a role played between both of those guys. And Tobias Harris is going to be a key fixture in Detroit this season.
Yeah, that's without question. And he was the scapegoat in Philadelphia. There's no question about that. Joel Embiid did spend a lot of time injured for one reason or another, and obviously, that's not something that Tobias Harris can control. He had the James Harden saga at the same time of he doesn't want to be in Philly anymore. He doesn't trust Daryl Morey. He's off in China saying he will never trust Daryl Morey. I mean, there was a lot of factors as to why the Sixers were not a successful playoff team. And also, they went out and got Paul George this offseason. Obviously, you're going to move on from Tobias Harris if that's the what's standing in between you and a player like Paul George. So there's no question that they made the right move in moving on from him either. The relationship just kind of ran its course. That doesn't mean that a bad relationship is coming to Detroit and that's what fans should expect. So I couldn't agree more. He's the second best player on the roster. I mean, quite frankly, right now, after Cade, it's Tobias Harris. The jury is out on Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey. Can they develop into the second best player over the course of the season? Boy, that'd be amazing. If that happens, then the Pistons are probably firmly in the play-in, to be quite honest. But right now, he's the second best player on the team. And when you make that kind of an upgrade year over year, the floor is raised immediately. I don't care what anyone else says. You added a player, and they're immediately the second best player on the roster. That raises the floor, no questions asked.
Agreed. And that's what I felt like Detroit did a really good job of in the offseason was they just got floor raisers. Like, I don't think they're a playoff team, and I don't necessarily know or believe that the Pistons think they're a playoff team, but they just did such a good job of getting guys that ensure that you don't lose 38 straight games, that your season's not over by December 31st. Like, they did such a good job at that. Not that was that hard to do. I mean, they had the worst roster.
The bar was on the floor, yes.
Yeah, the bar was below the floor. The bar was at the Earth's core. So it was very easy to get above that, and the Pistons did a good job of doing it. Give them credit I asked for credit's due. But the guys that they brought in, starting with Tobias Harris, raised the floor of this team, and improve the developmental trajectory of this team, and you'll see a better brand of Detroit Pistons basketball. Maybe not the old Detroit Pistons brand of basketball that they say they want to get to, at least not this year. But you'll see a better version compared to last season, and that is improvement, whether you want to celebrate it or not.
Yes, they're not going to win 12 games next year. That's not going to happen. And the goal was to get better. If they double their win total, I think they should be extraordinarily excited about it. So goal was met. Anything else you want to touch on with the Wings before we wrap up this edition of the podcast?
No, I've said it. I like it one last time. It's a deep group. It's a versatile group. All these guys are going to get opportunities at some point in the year. I'm really interested to see the different combinations. I'll say lastly, I don't know if this is going to be the starting combination at the 3 and 4. What I would personally decide if I were the head coach of the Detroit Pistons remains Simone Fontecchio and Tobias Harris for their mix of shooting, a scoring, ability to hold their own defensively. Neither, stellar or great defenders, maybe like Ausar Thompson is, but they both can hold their own. And they give just general floor spacing and a scoring complement to Cade Cunningham. So those would be my 2 picks for the 3 and 4 spot. Don't know if that'll be the case. I think they'll at least get a look together at some point in the preseason. JB Bickerstaff has made it very clear that he's going to try different things. But that's the last thing I'll add on the forward spot. And great job by Jasper on the breakdown. If you haven't read it, I really recommend palaceofpistons.com. Go check it out. It's our latest post. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button. It takes 30 seconds. We're really trying to grow our subscriber count on palaceofpistons.com. It's completely free to you. You're going to get all of our content sent directly to your email inbox as soon as it's published live. You will be the first people to know about it. So as we get set for the start of the season, like if I could ask anything of you, of course I want you to like this video or leave a comment or leave a 5-star rating. Like, of course I want you to do those things, and I hope you do those things. But I would ask above that to please go to palaceofpistons.com, check out our work, support our work, toss in your email for free, and subscribe so that you're getting our content without having to do any sort of searching or looking. It's going to come right to you right away.
Yes, great. Masterful segue. Yes. The subscriber count, we want to keep raising it as we head into the season. This is the most exciting Pistons season since I don't even know when. Maybe the most exciting that we have covered since Blake Griffin was on the roster, which is quite a while. So yes, you could subscribe to the show by clicking the link in the show notes, wherever you're consuming this podcast, whether that be YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. We would really appreciate it. We don't like to harp on it too much, but we really appreciate the support. We want to reach as many people as possible. We don't want to just talk into the ether. We were doing that for a long time. We want to talk to people and have that two-way communication, have that interaction. It's what keeps us going too. We really like to do it. And, if we didn't like to do it, we wouldn't do this podcast. We really like the comments. We like the the interaction with fans and just to talk Pistons basketball. That's why we ultimately do this. Aaron, any last thoughts before we wrap up this edition of the pod?
I am just so unbelievably excited for basketball to be back. I am enthralled with the talent across the league. I think there's so many good players. We are in such a fortuitous spot as fans of this sport with how many good players that are in this league. And on another sense, Pistons basketball is back. Like, we do this because we enjoy basketball, and there's something said about being able to watch the Pistons and talk about the Pistons and watch these other teams. So very, very excited for business to pick up in a sense, and looking forward to continuing to potting. Need the support from our listeners, need the support from our followers if we're going to continue to be able to do this and continue to grow and do new things. Like, I mean, let's be real for a second. Like, last year, we got to go out and cover Detroit Pistons for the first time at games, at media events, going to media day this past week. Like, those are all things that are possible because we've actually grown a voice in the community, and there have been a lot of people that have helped make that possible. I'd be afraid to know what we could do if we could double our community, if we could triple our community. So we need that support. We need your help. If you like our show and you want us to continue to get these opportunities and get these chances to bring you different content and do cool things, like, we need your help with that. So again, I know I already said it. Go subscribe. Please hit the follow button. Please hit the like button. Please leave us a good rating. I don't need any money from you. I don't need you to go tell the world like it's the gospel. I just need you to subscribe, and I just need you to follow because we're trying to bring you good content, and your guys' support makes that possible.
Amen. Oh, wait, it's not Gospel. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. And if you do want to read Jasper's article about the wings or any of the other ones, we have a great article on guards and about bigs as well. If you haven't gotten around to reading them, those are all on our Substack. So again, we encourage you to go to PalacPistons.com, subscribe, read our content. You're going to be getting written content throughout the season, in addition to the podcast every Friday. And that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor for this week's episode, and that is BetOnline. For my co-hosts, Jasper Apollonia and Aaron Johnson, thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network, and we will see you all next time.